All right, fantastic. Welcome everybody today to the call. Today we're going to talk about, I'm Leia Shilobod, I'm the CEO of Intech Solutions, and we specialize in helping companies and to get and stay CMMC compliant. We also specialize in helping MSPs, other companies like mine, to be able to do this work, because there are 200,000 companies in the Department of Defense's supply chain that need this kind of help and this sort of compliance. Certainly nobody can do it alone. It does take a team. So we're all here together to learn the best ways to be able to get compliant and stay compliant. Obviously, part of that is the fact that it does cost money, and we need to figure out the best way to be able to pay for that compliance. There's tons of changes you have to make in your business, and then you have to maintain compliance afterwards. That's why we invited Brandon Gray to the call today. Brandon and I have been working together. I don't know, Brandon, has it been a couple of years that we've been working together?
Yeah, 3 or 4 probably.
Oh my goodness, so it's been that long. Time has flown. Brandon and I have been working together for a couple of years. He is our CPA. He does consulting for us, helping us to understand what all of those numbers mean, and how to be able to have not only better gross profit, but then also understanding that there are services that we have to pay for to serve our clients better. And he's been fantastic in consulting us on that. So I asked him to come today because he also has many clients who are in the Department of Defense's supply chain, and talk to us a little bit about some strategies for trying to figure out how to pay for all this stuff. So probably a decent introduction, but Brandon, I'll give it over to you so that you can introduce yourself and we can get rolling.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Leia. That you pretty much nailed it in terms of what we do and how we work with clients. Our main focus is to help clients achieve and maintain profitability. And when it comes to the expense side of that equation, that plays a big role in it, especially whenever they're necessary investments such as CMMC that need to be made inside of an investment, inside of a business. And so we're going to spend some time today kind of going through that and talking about, okay, how do I prepare for this? How do I afford these investments that I'm going to be required to make? And we're going to look at the different ways we can do that. You might refer to them as levers inside of your business that you can pull in order to increase your profitability to have the additional capital needed to make these investments. I like conversations, not just presentations. And so I do have a PowerPoint. Can you guys see that okay, Leia? Can you see the PowerPoint? Yep. Okay. All right, perfect. I got that just to keep me from wandering, because I get excited about this stuff and I'll get to chasing a rabbit here. But all that to say, this will kind of keep me in line. And also at any time, feel free, I guess, just use the chat function. And Leia, if you and your team don't mind, to just kind of keep an eye on that chat function, and during the presentation, we will definitely go to the chat for questions, and then we've got some time allotted at the end that we can cover a little bit of Q&A as well from that standpoint. So that said, let's kind of get rolling here and talk about what we want to cover today. So I want to give you just a high-level overview of what's taking place in the current, what I refer to as the entrepreneurial economy. And I don't think any of this is going to be breaking news, but it does set the stage for kind of what we got to think about as we're looking at preparing our business to make investments. I think it goes without saying, economic outlooks right now, they're a little concerning. I would say the past 2 to 3 weeks, I've had more calls since when COVID first hit regarding, okay, if we were to see a downturn, and most folks are a little bearish and feel that we will, then what do we need to do? How do we prepare for that? And that seems to be a little bit of a theme. My clients that work with what I call the bigs, the really large billion-dollar corporations, they're all hearing from their customers that are those large corporations. Hey, we're reducing things, and so there's definitely a little bit of an environment of concern. Secondly, to add to the mix, I would assume most folks on this call you're part of an executive or a management team, and I would probably not have to venture too far out on the limb to say you're probably at capacity. We've seen that trend, going back to 2019, to where executive and management teams they're covered up. They don't really have a lot of bandwidth to do many more things. And so that being said, really having a strong group of partners that can help you with certain projects, outsource certain things can really be critical, especially considering that, you probably don't have another minute in the day to take on an additional responsibility. And then lastly here, is specifically what we're talking about today. IT and CMMC compliance, it takes investment. That's just the nature of it. And where everything is going to continue to head, IT is going to continue to play a more and more critical role. As if you guys haven't noticed, we're in a labor shortage. And so finding systems and processes that are automated and ways to go about completing work with less human effort, well, that gets back to technology. Not to even mention CMMC. The requirements, which I think are in a lot of cases good requirements that are put upon companies that really result in much more efficient and streamlined operating and technological systems. All that to say, that costs money. And so, hey, we got an economic outlook that we're concerned about, and we're about to spend more money. How do we balance these two? Okay, so that's just kind of a general overview of what we're looking at from an overall economic perspective. Let me pause there real quick. Any questions on that? Everybody kind of agree with that? Does anybody else have, somebody have any better news perhaps?
Oh, better news about the economy, or
yes.
I don't think anybody, there's nothing in the chat, but
Okay.
but I'm telling you that from my perspective, I listen to a lot of people. Are you familiar with Ray Dalio?
I'm not. No.
Okay. Yeah, he owns a firm called Bridgewater Financial, and he wrote several books. He wrote the one Principles, which is actually where we developed, it inspired us to develop our core values. But he has a lot of things online right now. He's talking about, he actually was able to predict the recession that we had in 2008 based on a lot of the modeling.
Yeah.
And so he does say, like, it's coming, but he doesn't think it's going to be as bad as 2008. So I guess that's a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's going to be bad, but maybe not that bad. I
would tend to agree. I think a part of it's because a lot of folks are seeing it coming. It's not going to sneak up on us, perhaps. And also, as we track a lot of our clients, we track information on 100 companies, and Leia's heard this before. We call it the 100 company model. It's kind of like an entrepreneurial Dow Jones. And so you're able to see those trends emerging. But one of the trends is that a lot of companies still have a sufficient amount of capital, which wasn't as much the case in 2008, which gives you some staying power. So fingers crossed, but as Leia's heard me say this before, you plan for the worst and you hope for the best from that perspective. But that said, let's talk a little bit about, regardless of where we think the economy's headed, we want to have a strong and profitable business. I got a client in the HVAC business, and they say, Brandon, we got to create our own weather. HVAC guys hate it whenever it's mild outside. They want it hot or they want it cold. They say, we got to create our own weather. Can't control that. Well, I can't control the overall economy. So let's talk about, how do I make sure my business is properly suited for being able to thrive and grow and have money to reinvest back into it. That's the one thing that, a lot of times people don't always think about, is that if I'm going to have a healthy business, I got to continue to feed this thing. And so how do I go about doing that? And so there's going to be 3 steps that we look at today. The first one is, how are we going to increase, and I'll define what I mean by this term we call gross margin dollars. What does that mean, and how can I get more of it? It's a good thing. Secondly, this is a real key in just about any business out there. How do I measure and increase the productivity of my team? And then the third point is, that's great, but there's a big difference between knowing and doing. How can I have a system by which I then can make an internal investment? So we'll cover all 3, and hopefully whenever you guys finish today, you've taken a few nuggets away that help you find a way to cover these costs that are going to be upcoming, and also have a good plan for CMMC. All right, let's start with the first one. Let's talk about increasing gross margin. So think of gross margin this way. It's going to be your revenue that you bring into your company minus your non-labor direct cost. Okay, and some of you out there may have no direct cost. Okay, we're a consulting firm. Our direct costs are people, so I'm excluding I said non-labor, so we don't have any flow through cost. Whereas other folks, they may have equipment, materials, supplies. Being in defense contracting, you may have subcontractors. That's a pass-through cost there. and what have you. May work on time and materials work, and so you've got materials that you have as a pass through. So just think about revenue minus those pass through costs. And so as I look at ways to do that, the first thing I want to look at is my pricing structure. Is there a way that I can change pricing? More on that here in just a second. And then secondly, I want to make sure that I am focusing my time, energy, and efforts on the highest margin segments or customers or products or services, however you dissect your business. As the old saying goes, I don't want to step over dollars to pick up dimes. So we're going to kind of talk about, how you do that, because it's, time and team members right now are a scarce resource. So I've got to make the absolute highest margin and return on those resources as possible.
So so we didn't actually practice this ahead of time. So I could totally be throwing you off or saying something you're going to say in a moment. So I apologize for that, but I'm going to say it anyway. Because I talk to a lot of companies that are in the DIB, in the defense industrial base. And that last part, focusing on the highest margin segments, customers, products, and services. So some companies, recognizing that there is a significant investment that they have to make to be CMMC compliant, especially at levels 2 or 3. This is actually something that they have to look at with their contracts. So
Definitely.
Is the juice worth the squeeze? Do we continue to maintain these contracts? Is the margin going to be there? Does it make sense for me to do that if I have this added cost?
Yep, exactly. So we'll dive into that. And no pun intended, it reminds me of a client, of a coworker said yesterday, their in-laws were getting a new swimming pool put in. And they had been on a list waiting for 2 years to get their pool put in. 2 years ago, they made a $500 deposit, which locked in pricing. So this contractor,
wow.
they're not a defense contractor, but they are a contractor putting in a swimming pool at a price they agreed upon 2 years ago.
Wow.
And my team members said, I wonder how many of those they can do. I said, enough until they go out of business.
Yeah.
Because it's up about 30%. And so, so to prove your point there, we'll talk a little bit deeper about it, Leia, but it happens. And I can share, unfortunately, several more examples of folks who actually have contracts with the government and different government entities right now where they locked in pricing 2-3 years ago. And it's, you don't have to look far to tell that's going to be an issue.
A problem. Yeah.
So let's talk about pricing. That's the first lever that I'm going to look at. If I'm trying to increase gross margin, I want to know what type of flexibility may I have there. So I say secret shopping here is helpful. Well, in the government sector, you're not really calling competitors and going, well, what are you charging? What are your rates? You can, but they're likely not going to give them to you. But whenever I win a contract or I lose a contract, sometimes you can get a little bit of additional information, and there's also friendly competitors. And so I want to know what's going on around. I just refer to that as secret shopping. I want to know what the marketplace is allowing for. And I get it. There's schedules many times that the rate structures and what have you. But at the same time, there's also fixed price bids on a lot of work that can be done. And there's time and material bids. And so how close am I to getting those? If you're not losing contracts and hearing no, then you're too low. That's a good kind of indicator of, well, and I get what a lot of folks are probably thinking. Well, I don't want to be told no. I don't want to lose the work. Well, at the same time, I don't want to get spread too thin doing work that's not profitable because I did not bid it or price it correctly. And so let's make sure, at times I got to really sharpen up that pencil, and other times I've got a little bit of flexibility. I want to know, hey, am I where I need to be from that perspective? Along with that, keep in mind, here's a news flash for you. We're in an inflationary economy.
Oh, no way.
Exactly.
I didn't know.
If you'd fallen asleep a couple years ago and woke up and went to fill your car up with gas, you'd probably pass right back out again, because it's an inflationary economy. So you got to revisit your pricing structure, your rates and all that. I say a minimum of twice per year. If you're in the government sector in particular, and I know some folks are in government with some things and in the private sector with others. Each time you have a contract come up, that's a good chance to look at your pricing and at your rates. If you're in the commercial segment of things, or have a sister company or what have you that does commercial work, minimum twice per year, you got to look at pricing.
Okay, so I have some things here. I'm so Brent. You said you wanted a conversation, Brandon, so I'm meeting you.
Yes,
all right.
Perfect.
So here's some things, right? So the first is that one of the things that I hear from a lot of companies in the DIB is that, while primes, their contracts are cost plus, so they get to build everything, all of their costs into their contract with the government. And then the subs, it's typically like competitive bid.
Right.
And one of the concerns right now has been for some time, and I think the tide is turning on this, but like the cost for the subs is increasing significantly, not just because of inflation, but also because of the additional cost burden of the CMMC program. And they're saying, well, we can't stay competitive. We're going to end up losing these bids because, there are companies out there who are not doing the same investment into the program, and that maybe they're even lying and saying, oh yeah, we are meeting this compliance completely, just so that they can get the bid now. But the concern, so they're afraid to increase their prices because of that. Have you heard that from any of your clients right now? And do you have any thoughts on how to get around that?
Great question. So occasionally I do hear it, whether it's in the defense sector or occasionally in other sectors as well, of this, what I call race to the bottom. Of, let's get it as low as possible from that standpoint. And it's usually a pretty short-term game, because you can only play that game for a certain amount of time. Of you take too much of a haircut on a couple of contracts, and most folks just don't have the capitals to do that long term and survive. And so it kind of gets back to when do I play the game and when do I not play the game? Now there is, we've got a broad audience, and so I want to be careful painting too broad of a brush, but I will tell you, there is a time and place to where you do consider, okay, I want to be competitive on this contract. And I'm going to play what I call the volume card. So I may have more contracts at less margin. Well, that sounds great, but just be sure that you still can administer it with your current overhead structure. Because once your overhead structure changes, now I don't have the margin built in on all those contracts I was bidding on to cover that. And that's where you kind of get caught flat-footed sometimes, especially in the government sector. So, you got to kind of be careful with that. But as I said, I usually see it more as a short-term game than a long-term game.
Okay. And so it probably sounds like what's likely to happen is that some of those companies that are playing more of the short-term game, either by driving the cost down just to get the bids, that it's likely that they're going to end up falling out of the DIB. Like they're going to not be able to fulfill on these contracts when they come for renewal, either because they can't afford to, or they're not in business anymore.
That CEO is usually not happy with their performance. So,
gotcha.
And two, it goes to this next point, which is that efficiencies can't fully absorb inflation. I've already got it razor thin, and now in order to properly staff the work that I have promised to do, I've got to give raises. I have to attract talent that I thought was going to cost a certain amount, and now it's 20% higher because the market is truly moving that quickly. You just can't get more efficient quick enough to offset the rate that inflation has been moving at. Now, will it continue to move in that direction? Possibly. Will it level out? Most likely. Is it going to go back? No, I don't think it's going to go back. But that being said, you just got to take into consideration, as Wayne Gretzky would say, skate to where the puck is going to be. I got to maintain and be competitive. And I get it. You got to substantiate cost and what have you, but you can do that in terms of what projections may look like if you're bidding on work for the future, especially if it's a multi-year deal. So I got a client that had a contract to provide security services with the government. And they priced it as a fixed price contract with no escalation rates based on labor costs from 3 years ago.
Wow.
Well, so I just picked them up. I didn't, in full disclosure, I had not told them to do that.
That's so
we just
funny.
started working with them. So anyway, they're taking a little bit of a haircut on that one. So, and on average, I would say folks many times will say, well, how much are prices going up? Well, I'm usually hesitant to give a percentage because it really kind of depends upon where you're starting at. But on generally 10 to 20% is what I typically hear. So that'll give you some guidance there. So revisit pricing, keep a watch on it. The second thing is this concept of stepping over dollars to pick up dimes. I want to analyze now. Now, this is an important point here, so everybody listen in. I want to analyze my margin dollars, not my revenue dollars, by different segments, contracts, products, services, customers, however you need to look at it within your unique business. You know, one of our favorite sayings is revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. Okay, so I need to look at what am I truly bringing in gross profit by working on this segment of my business. And, you know, there's story after story after story of an unprofitable contract, an unprofitable customer, and what have you. And unless you have an abundance of people, which most folks don't have that luxury right now, why would I want to deploy labor resources to work on a contract that I'm, you know, maybe breaking even on, to where I could deploy that same labor resource and I could make a 20% profit on it? It'd be crazy not to do that. Yet there's people day in, day out that are working on low margin business instead of having a difficult conversation and either changing the terms where they can, or just simply going, hey guys, we're going to have to find, you guys are going to have to find a different provider or what have you, unless we can get it to this level. So analyze your margin by the most granular level of activity that you can. And many times I refer to these as little nuggets. There's like gold nuggets inside your business. You go, oh, we should get out of that line of business. We're not making anything. Or, hey, how do we focus on more of this line of business? Because it has really healthy margin built into it. So I won't spend a tremendous amount of time going through that because each business is a little different, but just try to get it down to that base level. And because we're dealing with limited resources around people and time, I want my people spent doing the most productive and high value work possible. All right. Good deal. So let's shift gears slightly. Those are the first two things, pricing and margin, making sure we're focused on that. The next thing, and this is kind of, I'm going to try to stay too far out of the weeds. I'm going to give you an overview of this. So if you don't get it on the first time, just know that is completely normal. Here's a teaser at the end of the presentation. I'm giving you our website. Once you see it here on the screen anyway, you can go to simplenumbers.me, and we've got a bunch of free tools out there that will explain a lot of this. You can also look at the Simple Numbers YouTube pages and other places, and there are presentations recorded that go into detail around these concepts. Okay, so I just wanted to preface what I'm about to say next, because it can get a little nerdy, for lack of a better term, and I'm a numbers nerd, by the way, around what we're looking at. But I want you to take the concept and, you know, grab onto that today. And then if we need to go into detail more specifically about, well, how to calculate it and all that, we can do that. I'll show you at a high level, but don't get caught up in that.
Okay, I have the website, simplenumbers.me. I have that in the chat for you guys to grab. And you are a numbers nerd. That's why I love you and I pay you to consult me.
Well, thank you. I'll take that as a compliment. So we had a breakthrough, I would say, in our practice back at 2008, 2009, around this concept of labor productivity. And it really kind of became the thing as we started analyzing more and more businesses, to where we went, you know, this is where you make the biggest difference inside 99.9% of businesses out there, is how do I get my team to work as efficiently as possible? And how do I get the highest return? Not this, I mean, it's not about hours and utilization and what have you. Those are good metrics, but it's about what did I spend or invest. I like to think of an investment in a team member, because that's what I'm doing. I'm investing in them. What did I invest in them? And what did they produce for that investment? Thereby, that gives me my return from that team member or segment or group or whatever it may be. And that's all labor efficiency means, is how do I get a return on labor resources? And so we'll kind of go through that here in this next segment. So what is it? It's a metric that determines the return generated by my labor. Now, you know, if I can put $1 into a resource and it generates $3 for me, or I put the same dollar into another resource that generates $5 of return, sign me up for the one that generates 5, because I get a higher return on my money. That's just kind of common sense. And so whenever you think about it, That's all we're doing is we're looking at your data and the numbers inside your business in a fashion that allows us to go, here's what you spent on labor. And we got a couple buckets that I'm going to go through in a second. And here's what you got in return for it. Now, how does that compare to how you have historically done? And what does that mean as you move forward into the future? Can you get the same return? So back to our conversation we had a moment ago about inflation. I'm sure if we had a show of hands, everyone on here would say they are paying more for talent today than they paid for talent this time last year. And in many cases, substantially more for that talent. So I'm paying more for it, but if I haven't adjusted my pricing and in some cases my systems and processes to gain efficiency, I'm paying more for it, but getting the same amount of return from it. So I'm not getting the efficiencies. I'm not getting the same return that I should be getting. And so that's all we're looking at with labor efficiency.
You know what? So this is something that I want to just throw out here because you know, this is not on the number crunching side, but this is on the labor efficiency ratio and business process side. Sometimes when we work with some clients that need the CMMC compliance, we recognize that we're actually going to have to change a business process in order to be compliant, and the change in that business process ends up increasing costs, whether it is because now it's less efficient for employees to do the same tasks that they did before, or that change in that business process means that we have to implement a different kind of tool that will cost money each month.
Right.
So, and I didn't think about that. Like all of these different changes that we're going to have to make could potentially impact the labor efficiency ratios.
Great point. And so it's a little bit of those of us that were, you might recall from your childhood, would play the game whack-a-mole, where you had the big mallet and, you know, you hit one of them and then another one pop up. You kind of run into a little bit of that. And so if I'm giving up efficiency in one area, which I don't have a lot of choice about it, I have to give it up because I have to be compliant. Then I've got to be able to whack that mole down and then take care of one somewhere else. So I've got to, if anything, it forces me to make sure that I'm running things as efficiently as possible because it's reducing the room for margin of error. And in some cases, it's actually not a bad thing because, you know, it's kind of that I subscribe to pay now and play later, or play now and pay later, but either way, you're going to pay. Many times without those systems and processes that CMMC brings to the table, you've got holes and gaps in your systems and processes that could lead to security issues and breaches and IT issues. So you can play now, but you're going to pay later whenever there's ransomware or vice versa. So that's one of the ways to kind of look at it from that perspective. Because we do have a lot of DoD and government contractors on the call today, I want to mention this next point here, that revenue can be at record levels, but if your labor efficiency is below a minimum acceptable level, you will not generate a profit. You know, you just can't make up enough of it. If you got $1 million contract, and you're spending $1 million of labor to service it, good luck. That's going to be pretty hard to make a profit on it. Even if you're from Alabama, that's hard to do. And so, and I'm from Alabama, by the way. So that said, keep that in mind. Don't fall in love with revenue. It's about what return do I get, particularly on my labor spend. So there's two buckets I want to look at this at. And you guys being contractors are already familiar with this to a large degree. You know, you're used to bucketing of cost. And so I've got direct or billable, I've got G&A, I've got B&P, I've got SG&A, I got my different buckets. And so we simplified a little bit. We just put two buckets. We say, I want to look at the folks that are directly involved in working on delivering my service or product. It's direct labor. And then everyone else that supports them in doing so, they're management labor. Could say admin too, but most managers like to be referred to as management labor. So what I'm trying to look at here is for every dollar I spend for my direct team in direct labor, what do I get in gross margin? Okay. And I'm going to show this to you in just a second. And for management labor, it's a very similar concept, but instead of gross margin, I look at what is being contributed or left to pay my company's overhead with after direct labor has been expensed. And so that term we call CM, or contribution margin. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that too. Because, the number one job of your admin management team is to help direct labor be as efficient as possible. So I want to evaluate them after I've paid my direct labor resources.
I think that's so key, Brandon. That's so key. Is to think of it that way. Like the management labor is an investment. It's an investment in helping the direct labor to be more efficient, to be able to get more productivity. And that comes back to conversation about like, you don't just put a butt in the seat. Like it has to, each one of these people who they're an investment for your company to be able to produce something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great comment. And when you think of it in the context of IT and CMMC systems and processes, I don't want my team that's delivering service directly to the customer involved in having to set that up if at all possible. They need to go produce. Yeah. I need to worry about compliance and figuring out how to pay for this and how to make it work. And that way they can still focus on what they do well. And we can, because they're the engine. We call it the business engine.
Yeah, I think we actually have some Swiss Army knives on the call. That's what I call people who like they were hired for one job, and then suddenly they're like, now I'm doing IT, or they were hired for IT and they're like, I'm out on the floor fixing CNC machines, or
yep,
things like that. So if we have some of those Swiss Army knives on the phone, they probably really appreciate that last comment.
Good deal. Hey, they're very valuable team members without a doubt. So. So here's just a basic formula. If you look at the direct labor efficiency, so you look at your gross margin, which by reminder is revenue less your non-labor direct cost. And let's say in a week's time, it generated $100,000 for you, and you had to spend $50,000 in direct labor that week. Now, for every dollar I spend in direct labor, I got a $2 return. $50,000 produced $100,000. So the higher, the better. I want as much return on my labor. I want my labor efficiency ratio to be as high as possible. And so I put an investment in, the higher that it gives me a return, the better I'm going to be with that. So this is what we call a simple numbers P&L. And if you download some of our free tools, you're going to see this on our website as a template that you can fill in and use. But I wanted to use this as an example to just show the basics of the calculation. And so you can see we got our revenue here, 6.6 million. We got our cost of goods, which are our supplies, materials, subcontractors, everything that's not labor related by your company passed through. So that really left me $2,072,000 to pay my direct labor and all my overhead with. So I had to spend $491,000 to produce that 2.072 million. 2.072 divided by my 491 gives me $4.22. So for every dollar I spent on direct labor, I generated $4.22 of gross margin. I want that number as high as possible.
Yeah, that's a good number.
Yeah. Hey, I'll take it. Unless this company can do 5 or 6, and then it's like, I got to get to 5 or 6 again. But that being said, you just kind of look at it across time and you go, where's my highest? Where did I produce at the best? And how can I get back to that level? And if you think about how I drive this number, what did I say on an earlier slide? I want to increase gross margin dollars. So if I do a better job with my bids, or if I in the commercial sector increase prices, or I find a more efficient system and process to work on, I can get more gross margin dollars and not have to spend any more in labor. That increases my return.
So this is about trying to figure out, if for your business, if you're going to have to afford a program or an investment like this, like what lever or levers can I pull in my company so that I can have the capital that I need to invest in the program?
Yeah, exactly. And
beautiful.
And it's about how much lever gives you leverage, right? I could come down here and I could say, wow, I'll make up a number, a $30,000 investment and to get going on CMMC. And it could be more than that, obviously. I've got to find $30,000 of savings in my operating expenses to do that. Well, guess what? You're probably not going to find $30,000 of savings there. It's just not big enough. There's just not enough. So I've got to pull a different lever in my business. Now, when I look at this one, that's a big enough lever to where, hey, can I figure out a way to generate 30 more gross margin and not spend more in labor? Can I find a way to reduce my labor spend and keep my gross margin even? That's a big enough of a lever where I can make a difference with it. And so, you kind of, and I get it. We're all, when COVID first hit, everybody ran to this section of their P&L and said, I got to get skinny. Well, there's
Yeah.
nothing inherently wrong, but I'm telling you, there's much more meat on the bone up here that I can go after and try to get than down here. So that's kind of one of the things I wanted to emphasize today is let's focus on the things that can make a difference with the easiest and low, or what I call the low hanging fruit to free up the cash to then make these investments. So that's direct LER. The second bucket I want to focus on is what we call our management LER. And you can see here, this company spent $338,000 on management labor to produce contribution margin, which, by the way, as you can see in the ordering, is after direct labor has been expensed, 1.58 million. So for every dollar spent, 338 to produce 1.58, we received a return of $4.68. Here's a quick kind of check to see, is my management LER where it needs to be? If you're below 5 million in revenue, not in all cases, but just general advice, typically somewhere between a 3 and a 5. Am I going to be somewhere in that range? And there's plenty of people who are profitable below that. There's people who aren't profitable above it, but generally speaking, that's an area I want to look at. You can compare that management LER. We can across client base, because management of a team is no different in Leia's business than it is in my business. I could take her managers and put her in my team with my team. And once they learn the vernacular of the consulting profession, guess what? They can manage it because it's managing people.
Right.
And so, whereas direct labor is a little different, that's kind of your secret sauce. So it can vary. That's why you look for your own company best performance there. Okay, there's a lot of meat there in those concepts. And so we could we have presentations where we spend half a day going through those two concepts. So you just got a very high level one, but my point was I wanted you to see these are big levers. I want to try to attack them first before I try to go find all of my savings for CMMC and IT and other overhead. That's a tough sale. Okay.
So it kind of sounds like one of the first questions that an organization is going to need to, let's back up a moment. I mean, what you're talking about here are just sound principles. And I really think that everyone should be looking at their numbers and their books this way. By the way, I love the way that you simplify the GL.
Thank you.
Because we tend to want to be as, pretty granular on that so that we can see trends and dive into numbers, but really it helps to simplify it so that you can see better. Like, you have a question, why on earth did our marketing go up? And then you can just dive into, your more granular GL. But everything is I love the way you bucket that. But so while this is like just a better practice in general, if you're trying to figure out how to pay for the CMMC program, or really, I would say probably anything in your business, you could use this for anything. You have to start with, how much is it going to cost?
Right.
To get an idea, because you don't want to wander into this without having any idea how much it's going to cost your company. So, while this is a good thing to do, just regardless, because this is a best practice for your business, you definitely have to figure out like how much it's going to cost. And I know we actually did a webinar. We invited an assessor organization to come and speak. And they were saying that the assessments themselves, the CMMC assessments, like the official assessment where you get your certification, that starts around $15,000 for an organization, and that it'll go up from there depending on the scope and the complexity of the organization and how much CUI you have and where it lives, what your processes are, and all of those things. We heard a lot of some organizations saying it's going to be $100,000, and I can say with confidence that no one on this call is going to pay $100,000 for an assessment. If someone's quoting you that, then everybody come and talk to me, because you're getting ripped off.
And it happens. It happens. Yeah.
Oh yeah. There are so many organizations right now that are really taking advantage because there's so much unknown in CMMC. So, a lot of companies they're taking tons of money for either, poor work quality or bringing back something that's really not that valuable. And taking advantage of the fact that a lot of companies in the DIB, they don't know. They don't know, and they'll just take advantage of you, take your money, and they don't seem to feel bad about that at all.
Great comments. I'm going to give you just just 2 or 3 quick things here, how to increase this LER so I can free up more profit to make these internal investments. And then we're going to shift gears and we're going to go very similar to what Leia was saying just a moment ago around, okay, how do I make all this happen? Let's get tactical. So the first one, we call this accurate time entry. I got to know what people are working on, you know. I can't look at labor efficiency, and it's great if I can look at the contract level and the customer level. If I don't have time entry on those things, I can't judge it to know. So we want to make sure folks are tracking things, which with government contractors, that's kind of a big deal. You know, they make a big deal out of that over at the DoD. So a lot of you are already doing that. Secondly, I want to make sure I'm putting the right person doing the right thing. And this one's hard sometimes because of a customer or another contractor has a relationship with someone and they really like them and what have you. And you go, hey, this is good, but I can't continue to have my cloud engineer working on setting up a printer for you. It just doesn't work, you know? So I got to have the right person doing the right task from that standpoint. And then the last thing is I got to find a way through systems and processes to try to increase my revenue and margins and maintain labor spend. That, gets back to the pricing, gets back to the right type of work. So those are just a handful of things that you can do there. Let's talk now how we make this tactical. So I'm not a big fan of what folks refer to as budgets. I like forecasts. And you go, well, what's the difference? Well, it's slightly different. A budget many times becomes a license to spend, whereas a forecast is a plan to spend. And those are, they may sound like they're the same, but there's a little bit of a difference there. So as Leia was saying, the first thing I got to have to make an internal investment, whether it's CMMC or other investments in my company, is a target. What's the goal here? What I got to generate? Is it 50,000? Is it 100,000? Is it 15,000? Is it 2,000? Where am I aiming for? And secondly, then I want to build a roadmap and a plan to produce that. And I work kind of backwards in that regard of, hey, here's what I know it's going to cost me. Let me go ahead and plug that into my spend plan, into my overhead section of my profit and loss projection. Then let me set an appropriate target for revenue and gross margin and labor efficiency to get that and still get the profit that I need out of my business. And so I'm kind of backing into it, if that makes sense. I'm going, hey, I got to spend an extra 40,000 this year on CMMC. Put that in my expense buckets, and then I'm going to back into what have I got to produce in additional labor efficiency or additional gross margin dollars, and then ultimately revenue to make that happen. So determine what you got to spend, build your plan up around it. Don't count on having something left over to cover a needed and required investment back in your business. Attack it from the top end first. Okay. All right. So that said, what are your next steps? Where do we go from here? What do we do? As we just said, let's determine what we gotta, what's needed. What's the target? What do we got to spend? And by when do we need to spend this? Is this something I need to do tomorrow? Is it something I should have done yesterday? Do I have 3 months? What does that look like? And just like Leia said, partner with an expert on this. We know simple numbers, but I don't know the first thing about IT. So I got to find, if I want my firm to be CMMC compliant, I got to find somebody to help me with that.
Yeah. I mean, like that's the question. Anytime I start working with an organization, that's their first question. How much is this going to cost? How much is it going to cost? And you truly, I can never answer that question until we find out. I mean, we have a proven process, and the reason it's called a proven process is because it's a process that's been proven to work. How about that? We start with identifying like what is the data that we need to protect, because that's what you're contractually obligated to do, is to protect that data. And so what is it? How does it flow into the organization? Where does it live there? Who accesses it? Is it allowed to flow out? How does it flow out? Because the whole program is about protecting that data and putting controls over the protection of that data. So if you don't know that, then you can't even begin to figure out what the costs are. I mean, I talked to one organization, and we spent many hours on calls just talking about what is the data. And they were like, well, we don't really know, because some of it's not marked properly, or we're not really sure what is and what's not. You have to make that determination. No one's going to show up and give you the answer. You need to look at contracts, and you need to talk to your contracting officers, and then make that determination for your organization and start there. And then once you determine what that is, like that's flowing in, then you can say, okay, well, now that we can track it through the organization, that comes back to like what I was talking about, that sometimes they have to change the business process, or that touches that information because the business process is not compliant. Sometimes that's a literal process. Sometimes it's like we print out the drawings and we put this in a part book and it just floats around the plant. Well, that process is not going to be compliant, because it has to be secured at all times, even in hard copy. So now we're actually talking about like really just changing like a hard copy kind of process. But we wouldn't even know that if we didn't start in the beginning and identify the rest of it. And then after you've done that, and then you can take a look at where you sit now with alignment with the controls and the compliance. Then you can start to see projects, and you can say, okay, so I see a bunch of things we're going to have to change or upgrade, or invest in some new technology maybe. And then those projects, if you can like clarify the projects you have to do, you can assign a dollar amount or a man hours amount, like changing that business process of what are we going to do now? We can't just print out the drawings and have them float through the plant. There's going to be a cost for that, right? What you were talking about either management cost or direct labor costs associated with changing that process. And then, and you can quantify that now because you've clarified all the stuff you have to do. And then once you've done that, then you see budget, because then you can see, oh, okay, here's all the stuff we have to do. Here's about how many man hours it's going to take. Here's how much the hardware is going to cost, the software, or maybe some outsourced assistance to get those things deployed. Now I have my roadmap. Now I know how much it's going to cost me. And then to your second point, I know we hadn't talked too much about this, but the DoD did tell us that the final rule will be committed next March. So I think we're at like right around 200 days until the final rule for CMMC is passed. And then they expect to see that in contracts and new contracts 60 days after that. So like basically we're looking at a year from now is where you're going to see the CMMC requirements in new contracts. So I don't know where people are in like in their contract cycle, but if you have anything that's going to be renewing or needing to go back out to bid, a year from now ish, you're going to end up seeing the CMMC requirements in those contracts. So we don't really have that much time, especially because I've seen in my experience, I have tons of clients that I work with. It takes 18 to 24 months to completely onboard this program.
Clock's ticking.
Yeah.
Great thoughts there, Leia. That really helps. In terms of what that process looks like, and like she said, you don't know, until you go through it, you're just not simply going to be able to go, here's what it costs, and there's a lot of things like that, and definitely need the insight to know what rocks to look under and make sure you're covered.
Does anybody have, I don't see any questions in chat or in the Q&A right now, but does anyone on the call have any questions for Brandon or for me that you wanted to ask really quickly? I do have a final question for you, Brandon.
Okay.
If anyone who attended this call thinks like me, wow, this guy is brilliant. I need this look into our books to kind of get clarity to see how we can, find money and our more to our bottom line. What is the best way to be able to reach out to you, or do you guys offer like a 15-minute kind of consult call to explain the way that you work or how you'd be able to help?
Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Very kind words. So our website's going to have an abundance of free tools on it. So I typically tell folks, hey, look there, it may be something easy and can give you a
Mhm.
template and can help. Great, move on. Hey, but not every case is going to be that easy. And so many times it's like, yes, I want to peel the onion back a little bit more, dig a little bit deeper and see what's going on. And so there's several ways you can get in touch with us. One, Leia has our contact information, so feel free to let her know and she can pass it on to her team. Also, simplenumbers.me has an inquiry request that can be made there if you're interested in working with us or what have you from that standpoint. And then the very first slide of our presentation has my email on it as well. Go back to that in case somebody wants to capture that, so you can shoot me over an email. We got a pretty simple process in terms of anybody that calls us, we just have a conversation with them and kind of see where their pain points are at. And many times during that conversation, we can give them just a few ideas or thoughts, of, hey, these are some low-hanging things, low-hanging fruit that you can go and attack and make a pretty quick difference. By the way, we got 2 books out: Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits. And then we also have that in version 2.0, Rules for Smart Scaling. Both of those have a lot of content. But let's say, do all of that and you still need some guidance, which a lot of folks do, fortunately. Then reach out and call us and we'll chat and go through, hey, let's see if we can help you. And then we've got a process by which we do some impact events with clients to try to help them kind of get over the hump initially, then perhaps have some ongoing services. So I guess what I'm trying to say, there's abundance of ways. We've tried to be as flexible as possible and cover people as much as possible too, because we try to give back to the entrepreneurial community. And so that's why we have those free tools and resources. It's kind of part of who we are and what we want to accomplish. So
I love that. By the way, anyone, I highly recommend the Simple Numbers book. It was life-changing for me, literally. I am not a numbers cruncher person. I don't like to do math. And this book was fantastic. So I recommend it to everyone. My bookkeeper, who's like really smart, used to be a controller in an enterprise, read this and she was like, wow, this is so cool. This is the best way to be able to manage stuff. Somebody asked, are the books different or old versus new? Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah. So the original text, Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits, is different than the second book, which is Simple Numbers 2.0, Rules for Smart Scaling. I would recommend read and I believe both are now available in audio versions, but read the first one first, because that's kind of your basic fundamentals. Get those things down. Much of what we talked about labor efficiency is introduced in that book. The second book, the 2.0 book, it's a little bit more advanced. It's going to cover things such as the need for capital in your business and how much is enough, and the need for capital to invest, and how do I know if that's a good investment, and measuring this concept we call trade capital, which predicts if you're going to go out of business or not, and then elaborates at a little bit of a more in-depth and higher level on some more of the concepts such as labor efficiency that we covered today in the first book. So but start with the first one, read it, and then get the second one, and they work pretty well in terms of kind of one building on the next.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, thank you again so much for coming
you're more
today.
than welcome. Yeah, it's one of those things to where, complete confidence in Leia and her team. And whenever she has put together things like her compliance systems and processes for CMMC, and she's like, hey, we need to come up with a way to help people understand this better. I'm like, I'm all in, because this truly, you put the two things together and you can achieve some great things. And so hopefully you've gotten some nuggets from it. And, like I said, feel free to reach out to us or Leia and her team anytime we can help in any way.
Sweet. All right. And I'll send everybody a copy of the recording too. So if you have somebody on your team that is primarily responsible for finance, that you're like, they have to watch this, don't worry, there will be a recording and you'll get that too. All right. Thank you again, Brandon.
Thanks, guys. Make today great. See y'all.
Bye.